Hi, I'm Otto, and I'm the person who is mainly responsible for the Debian packaging of MariaDB. And I'm now gonna do you a quick overview of what happens after a new upstream release becomes available and what kind of quality assurance it goes through before it lands in the official archives of Debian and Ubuntu and becomes available for users in those distributions. Now, first of all, why is Debian and Ubuntu interesting? Well, they are among the most popular Linux distributions, and there are millions of people who start using MariaDB by running apt install MariaDB server in these distributions. It's said that Debian is kind of the mother of all Linux distributions, or most of them. It's very old. It started back in the 90s, and the relation between Debian and Ubuntu is that Ubuntu is downstream from Debian, and most of the software in Ubuntu is directly inherited from Debian. And that is the case for MariaDB as well. We do packaging of MariaDB for Debian, and from there it flows to the Ubuntu repositories. So all of the quality assurance done in Debian will benefit Ubuntu users. So what's the current state of MariaDB and Galera in Debian? You can at any time go to packages.debian.org or Ubuntu equivalent page packages.ubuntu.com. And here you can see an overview, what is the status at the moment. And now a quick overview of what actually happens in the packaging process. So first of all, in Debian we don't use directly the upstream Git repository. Instead, there is a separate Debian packaging Git repository at salsa.debian.org, and into that repository we import every upstream release, and every upstream release is basically just one big Git commit into that packaging repository. And the tool used for this is called uscan. It will automatically scan the servers where MariaDB is published, and when there is a new release it will notify the maintainer in Debian, and using uscan you can download the upstream release, and it will verify the signatures and make sure it's authentic and so on. And it's important to understand that the upstream release is basically a tar.gzip package. We don't import the Git commits, and whatever is in that package is the contents of the official release. In Debian we don't do changes to the upstream files. Instead, there is a subdirectory called Debian, and all the packaging work goes into that directory, and all the modifications happens in that subdirectory. It's also important to realize that the distribution have their own revisions of the upstream releases. So if we have 10.5.8, which is the latest upstream release, in Debian the first revision will be 10.5.8-1, and then eventually -2, and currently -3. And these Debian revisions represent new uploads of that package to Debian, which has the same upstream contents still, but there are changes to the packaging or some bugs fixed or something that's specific for Debian. And anybody can participate in the packaging work and do pull requests and stuff, but to be able to upload software to Debian you need to be a Debian developer, and there's about 1,000 people in the world who have access to be able to upload to the Debian archives, and I'm one of those, so it enables me to do this MariaDB packaging. I also package other stuff for Debian as well. The basic quality assurance system in Debian is that there is a special archive called unstable, and all new software and all new releases of new software lands in unstable first. And then there is a lot of quality assurance going on in the unstable archive, and the people who are testing software in unstable can file bugs against them. And there is a delay that a package needs to stay in unstable for a while, and only if it passes all the quality assurance and there are no severe bugs filed against that package, then it will migrate into testing. And that's a separate archive, and eventually testing will be frozen, and that becomes the next stable Debian release. I'm gonna publish these slides so you can look at these details later on yourself. Then there are also security releases in Debian and in Ubuntu, and they follow a slightly different quality assurance model. And the challenge, of course, for security releases is to balance the urgency of getting the new release out into the hands of users against the inherent kind of safety and quality assurance that comes over time when you do things a bit slower and you make releases available in unstable first and then it moves into a stable repository. The security releases are done directly into the stable repositories. Debian is notoriously famous for this Debian policy. It spans over 150 pages, and it's something that everybody who uploads software to Debian are kind of required to know and follow. And it's not just that document, there's also a huge amount of other guidelines and documents around, and all of these kind of define what Debian considers as good quality for software, and all of the packages need to follow them to ensure that as a whole the distribution and everything that's inside the distribution is of a high standard and works well for the end users. So these policies and guidelines kind of sometimes force the package maintainer in Debian to do something differently or better than what upstream has done. And that's one layer of quality assurance. Then of course there is a huge amount of software systems running in Debian doing automatic quality assurance as well. All of these systems are online and completely transparent, so you can go and check them out. I'm gonna publish my slides so you can then go and check all these links in the slides yourself. And there are dashboards that are for the maintainers so that they can see an overview of their packages, and then there are dashboards that are tailored from the point of view of one specific package and all the Q&A going on for that package. Here, just to illustrate, I'm not going to go through the details here, but just to illustrate, this is how the MySQL and MariaDB packaging team dashboard looks like at the moment. So the people who are doing MySQL packaging and MariaDB packaging are all in the same team here under the same umbrella. And this is the tracker page for MariaDB 10.5. And here you can see that there is information about the package in general. There is information that what does this upstream source package and packaging in Debian, what binary packages does it generate in Debian. There is the history of what versions and revisions were uploaded. There are notifications for the packager of what kind of quality issues there are that should be addressed. There are links to bugs here and links to all the other QA systems, and also if there are some issues with the package preventing it from migrating to unstable to testing, they will show up on this page. So let's start with the first and most basic quality assurance system in Debian, that is the Debian Builder. So in Debian, when you upload new software to the archives, you upload it as source, and then the Debian infrastructure will then compile it into the binary packages. And here you can see that Debian has several official architectures, and all packages must work for all these architectures. And then there are even more unofficial architectures which are dimmed in this screenshot here. And MariaDB 10.5 is currently building and passing the test suite on more platforms than ever before. but still not on every single one, but the remaining ones are perhaps not that important. They are not even all using the Linux kernel. Then there is another build system which is called reproducible builds, and this is for security purposes and for ensuring the supply chain security. So the goal here is that a package is considered of high quality if the package, when you build it, will always produce exactly the same binary. So if you have the same version and you build it on the same architecture, the resulting binary packages should be identical. And you can use this to kind of do builds in different places and then compare that to the binaries you get from Debian, and if they differ, then there's a chance that they have been manipulated on the way. But with this you can rule that out. Debian has also this its own CI system called Auto Package Test. So package maintainers can choose what those auto package tests in practice are, and you can go to ci.debian.net to have an overview and check out whatever package you want. And on the left you see here a screenshot from MariaDB on there, and here on the right you can see a screenshot from the tracker page, how it looks like immediately after a new upload of MariaDB, because in addition to running MariaDB's own auto package test, this system will also trigger the auto package test of all those packages that depend on MariaDB. And this is a way to kind of make sure that there are no regressions introduced by uploads of new software. Very extensive. Ubuntu has the same, it's using the same tests and the same software. The only difference is that it gets triggered by changes to the Ubuntu archives instead. Then there's a tool called PewParts, and this takes the binary packages, it installs them, upgrades them, uninstalls them, checks that there are no stray files left behind, and does this kind of basic packaging operations, and they must all work for a package to pass the QA. There's also a tool called Lintian. You can run it as a command line tool on your own computer, and there's also an online version that publishes reports for all the packages in Debian, and it includes thousands and thousands of small tests from everything from spelling and copyright issues to things like checking how the symbols in a binary library are versioned and stuff like that. And some of these tests are Debian specific, that the package follows the policy in Debian, but many of these tests also find issues which are interesting for upstream, like spelling errors obviously should be fixed as upstream as possible. Then we also have, specifically for MariaDB in Debian, we have this CI pipeline that's built and integrated with salsa.debian.org, which is an instance of GitLab. And this triggers on every commit we do to the Debian packaging repository. This runs the same Q&A tools as the Debian infrastructure will run on the package after the upload, but this runs it on every commit, so we know the result of those tests before we do an upload. And in addition, there are also many custom tests here. We test that, for example, encrypted connections work, and we test that third-party software that were built against the MariaDB C connector continue working, and we test almost every scenario of upgrading from a previous MariaDB or MySQL version to the one in the commit. Then we also have the users who are filing bugs against packages they are using in Debian. This is the current state of MariaDB 10.3 in Debian, and it's going pretty well, and there's not that many bugs anymore. And we also need to keep an eye on the same thing on Launchpad, which is the system where Ubuntu users file bugs when they encounter some in Ubuntu. some users might file the bugs directly upstream at MariaDB's own Jira, but some users just by default file most of their issues in the distribution's own bug trackers. All of the issues we find, we try to solve, and we try to solve them so that we can upload to Debian a new version where the issue is solved. So the fixes go to Debian itself first, but eventually we try to upstream everything. And we try to upstream everything as upstream as possible. So obviously most of the fixes go to MariaDB itself, but then also lots of fixes go to the connector C library and to upstreams like RocksDB and Roomgun, so on. So it's not just Debian users who benefit from the Q&A done in Debian. It's also all of the users of MariaDB that then eventually benefits for all the quality assurance done in Debian and Ubuntu. There's quite a lot of work, so we are always happy to see new contributors. But this is also very interesting and rewarding work because you can see the results of your work. It's very concrete and you know that millions of people are benefiting from what you're doing immediately. Here are some links if you want to join. And that was it. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Otto, for the presentation on Debian and Ubuntu and how we do things. I'd actually like to just ask a few questions on the security releases. You mentioned that doing a security release is a balance of speed and QA. How's it generally worked out?
Well, most of the time it works out just fine. There has been a couple of upstream MariaDB releases that were security releases and included regressions, but luckily those were discovered like on the same day as the upstream release was, so they didn't have time to propagate into Debian and Ubuntu.
Okay, so you had time to stop it there. Okay, so what's the usual release delay when you're doing a security release?
Well, I do get an email when there's a security release in the works, so I can basically start preparing it the same day it's out. But then you need to collaborate with the security teams of the distributions and get permission, like pre-approval to upload and such. So I would say it varies between 3 days and 10 days, maybe something like this.
Okay, I'm just getting it out. Do you get many bug reports coming out of security-specific releases?
Not really. The ones that we've shipped in Debian and Ubuntu have gone pretty well. So if there are like severe regressions, those have been catched by upstream pretty quickly before we've had time to upload that version to distribution. So security releases, it's a challenge to balance between the kind of the urgency to get it out and then the benefits of doing it slightly slower to have time for people to discover issues. But I think we've managed that balance pretty well, and the end result has worked fine for the distribution users.
Okay. I noticed when Sergej's talk about how they do security releases, he talked about that MariaDB's release cycle is following like the Oracle CPU release cycle of theirs, so that MariaDB releases have actually, for the most part, included all the Oracle MySQL security fixes that were applicable. How has this impacted on the Debian releases of MariaDB?
Well, I think it's worked pretty well, because if you don't consider that, then you are kind of forced to do additional releases. And I think the root problem here is that the Oracle CPUs are pretty much void of any actual information of what is the security issue and what is not. And I think that most of those that are labeled as security issues are actually not real security issues. It's just that there's a bug that makes the server crash, and they seem to have an internal policy that whatever crashes the server is potentially a security issue, even though there's no real vector for attacking there. So you kind of have to ship it because they've been labeled as security, but it's not often actually urgent. But I think that how MariaDB is now doing the timing is an optimal way to do it.
Okay. When you talk about Debian's policies and the 100 pages, you talked about this as being delivering a quality in the policy. How do you see the most significant bits of quality from a user perspective?
Well, the manual is huge, and there are lots of policies in it, but I think most of it is things that are like generically good quality. Like, for example, that when you install files on the system, that their locations follow the Linux standard base standard, and that the places are sensible, and that the names of the commands are sensible. If you have a distribution and you have commands, then you most of the time want that the commands somehow relate to the application name, that you don't have for example, a command called convert, because if you have a convert command on your system and there's no way to tell what software package that relates to, it's way too generic of a name.
Of course, it's from ImageMagick. Anyway, so you mentioned when you're part of a team on the package MySQL maintainers group within Debian, but a lot of the commits you've actually done yourself. What kind of collaboration takes place in the team?
Well, it's been fairly silent recently because the people packaging MySQL haven't been very active in recent years. And I think that from a Debian point of view, it's declining the quality of the MySQL packages. And it's a big package and it's a complex beast. So it's not something that's attracting a lot of new contributors. So most of the time, the contributors we have are actually people doing porting it to different architectures and more advanced users who then contribute to make sure that MariaDB works in their use case and on their platforms.
Okay, that's a good sign. And I guess on the architectures, when we talk about the Debian builder, you mentioned there's a bunch of official architectures, and the Debian policy is what must always work on the architectures. How does that work when the upstream doesn't exactly have all of them?
Well, you can, if you specifically want, then you can omit some architectures. For example, for RocksDB, we have that it works only for 64-bit systems. So obviously, we can't ship RocksDB plugin on 32-bit systems. But in general, most software do work on all of these platforms if they just have a little bit of attention. And usually the Debian porters people are pretty good at finding out what are the small tweaks you need to do to the source to get it compiling and running on the different architectures. And I think that also the main architectures benefit from that work, because often the reason that it doesn't compile on a certain architecture is that you are doing something wrong and you're violating the C standard. And if you're doing everything according to standards and how you're supposed to do it, then all the platforms will build it.
Yeah, I agree. Formerly doing IBM power stuff, it's a lot of simple rules just to get you over that basic hurdle, and most of it comes down to adhering to the standard. So you mentioned in the Debian builder there's a bunch of tests that actually get run. Which parts do you test in that CI process?
So in the build process in Debian, we are running the basic a main suite, just like if you build MariaDB yourself and you don't do anything special, it will immediately after the build run MariaDB's own test suite. So we are reusing that to run it directly after the builds to ensure that whatever was built is actually runnable.
Okay, and so this, does a lot of assuming that, the upstream MariaDB has done a more collaborative, more comprehensive, should I say, testing of it anyway.
Well,
so
at the moment, the main suite works pretty well on all platforms. So
yeah, I know they jump on pretty quickly on failures on that one. So what kind of collaboration goes on between unofficial architecture maintainers?
Well, when I do an upload and I see that something is failing, then I file a bug inside Debian, and then I try to make it as easy as possible for the porters to discover that. And obviously they don't have MariaDB background, so I attach instructions how to build MariaDB and which version exactly is the failing one and things like that. And then I try to attract the porters to take a look, and quite often it's something fairly simple that's failing, and when that one or two things is fixed, then the build works. And the porters, either they tell me just some hints what's going wrong, or they submit a patch via email, or sometimes they even open merge request on Salsa, which is the collaboration platform.
System. Sure. Yeah. Yep. You talked a bit about reproducible builds as part of a supply chain security, and what people normally actually care about reproducible builds. How did it sort of come to be in the open source ecosystem?
Well, I think that's a fairly new thing, maybe 4 years old, and it is a fairly advanced level of security if you don't trust the supply chain and you want to figure out ways how to validate that the supply chain has worked and you don't get backdoored binaries. And the software is in a quite central place in society, and we have rumors and examples of official binaries being backdoored and stuff. So I think that there is a demand for reproducible builds, and that's going to help protect the supply chain. And actually quite a large part of all the software in Debian is already reproducible. And even in MariaDB, everything else apart from the RocksDB module and Murunga module can build in a reproducible way. So we are pretty close to meeting this requirement.
Right. So on the upstream focus on that, you mentioned those two plugins are incompatible currently because they have like date stamps or something in that. How consistent is the rest of the build process from the MariaDB upstream on reproducibility?
Well, everything else works. There was initially, when we started looking into this, there was a couple of things where there was like timestamps embedded, or the directory name of where the build was embedded in the resulting binary, but those have been cleaned up, and nobody has introduced anything new recently that would break reproducible builds. So I think the state is pretty good.
Those would actually still be like paths. They would still actually occur in the debug builds and cease the debug information. So I guess that's just excluded.
Yeah,
maybe. Yeah.
I think that the domain of reproducible builds is perhaps something that's not the highest priority in many places. It's like an additional security requirement, which is not something people think about from day to day. But
I guess, with open source and particularly Debian is like a very smooth lining the supply chain to the user, that sort of the ease of it sort of makes it attractive from a backdoor point of view.
Yeah, And if you're like a government agency or something and you're using Debian, then perhaps you don't want to trust that the Debian builders have not been compromised, and you want to do your own parallel builds, and maybe you want to compare. So actually, if you like want to have maximum security, you could, instead of ever fetching any binaries from Debian, you would only take the source code and build everything yourself. But I think that also from a security research point of view, it's nice that there is a way to detect if the binaries have been backdoored. So as long as that's not happening, then there's more trust in the supply chain. And also the mere existence of reproducible build then kind of excludes that whoever wants to attack the infrastructure can't use just simple backdooring of binaries.
Yeah, it sort of makes it obvious, and that sort of further complements, I guess, the checksums and the other processes that are a part of the packaging as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess moving on, talked about like the CI.debian.net and the auto package tests actually build a lot of packages that depend on MariaDB, and that's kind of the obvious step for CI from a distribution point of view. How stable is this, and sort of what sort of kinds of problems can occur?
Well, it has worked surprisingly well. There are very few false positives. And if there are false positives, you can always contact the release manager, and then they can add exceptions for the tests if you want to get, if there is truly a false positive. But most of the time, if the Debian CI tests have failed, it has been a sign of an actual failure in either MariaDB or the way how something that uses MariaDB, how it depends on MariaDB. It hasn't been using the correct library names or something like that.
No.
So I
think seen it before, that there's been like deprecated APIs that have been deprecated for so many years, and all of a sudden people turn them off, and that's actually, I guess, the stage where it's noticed.
I think it's definitely valuable that the stuff that have been detected by that system is most of the time real issues, and the mere existence that you have hundreds and hundreds of depending packages that test against MariaDB on every upload and nothing breaks is very cool, because it gives you a confidence that things are unlikely to. At least
you've got a good confidence that the dependent packages are testing against the stuff they're linking to. Is that right? You're fairly confident that the packages that depend on MariaDB are testing it. Yep. Okay, on the CI pipelines, I think it's been just in the last couple of years you've put actually a lot of effort into making this additional stage of the testing framework. You mentioned encryption, the connector C ABI. Was there something else?
So Debian started using its own GitLab instance, like I think two and a half years ago. So this Salsa system is salsa.debian.org, is a pretty new one. And immediately when it came out, people started also using the GitLab CI features of it. And also in MariaDB packaging, we started using it first, very simple things. And over the past years, it has evolved into quite a huge testing thing with 45 jobs at the moment. And
speak.
Yeah, and we are testing the same kind of things that are common in the bug reports filed in Debian. And
okay, just wondering how you derive that.
That's kind of the motivation why we are testing it. For example, people were complaining that some of the encrypted connection settings were not working, so we built a test for it, and then with that we get complete confidence that everything that's supposed to work in the build is working.
Okay. So what's next in the CI pipeline tests?
Well, I don't have any ideas at the moment. It's pretty complete. I think that whatever new bugs people file, that probably dictates what we want to test in the CI pipeline.
Okay, on bug reports, you mentioned you kind of cross-check Debian bugs with Ubuntu bugs and see what's going on. Do you look further on to other derivative distributions to see what bugs they are getting?
Well, I'm not following what other distributions, what bugs are filed there, but occasionally I go and check out how the packaging is done in other distributions to learn if they are doing something special.
Okay. Yep, so they're all easy to find. Cool.
Also a mailing list for packagers in MariaDB, and sometimes there are a couple of discussions there where people coordinate and discuss the best practices of how to.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. That obviously distributions have similar challenges in presenting MariaDB to their user base and complying with their own policies.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how that gets discussed.
Yeah, so obviously, even though the packaging formats are different, like Deb and RPM and others, still I think that the goals for the distributions are very similar. Like you want to have high quality, you want to have all the files and their locations and naming sensible and standardized, and you want to make sure that the upgrade path is always smooth from all previous versions. And I think that the discussions there have been related to how to smoothly upgrade when there have been significant changes in upstream MariaDB.
Okay. So as kind of a final question, how's your assessment on MariaDB upstream? Are we doing the right things, and what would you like to see improved?
Well, I like the fact that people are pretty active on Zulip. So if I get stuck with something in the packaging or in building or whatever, I get pretty quickly a response on Zulip and some pointers on what to look next. So that's pretty good. But then what's not working that well is that there are quite a lot of bug reports that initially they might get some attention, but then in the long run they go ignored for a long time. And there should be some room to improve kind of the discipline and the prioritization of issues that at the moment I think that it's some kind of a challenge that there are so many things that are so high priority that you don't actually have priorities.
It certainly feels like that sometimes. So yes, thank you for the feedback, and thank you for your talk, and much appreciated coming along to the Mini Server Fest.
Thanks for inviting.